Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first session of our Level Up Your Roadmap series, presented by Product Management Today and sponsored by Logi ANALYTIcs. I'm Shelley, I'm the Webinar Manager of Product Management Today, and I'm excited to bring you 6 brand new speakers who are going to bring you their hard-earned insight about road mapping. We are recording all of them in case you have to miss any. We are sending the link to the series page in the chat box right now. Before we go any further, I want to thank Logi Analytics for sponsoring the webinar series and helping us to make this happen. Can we pull up the Logi slide really fast? Perfect. Logi Analytics empowers the world's software teams with the most intuitive, developer-grade embedded analytics solutions and a team of dedicated people invested in your success. Logi leverages your existing tech stack so you can quickly build, manage, and deploy your application. And because Logi supports unlimited customization and white labeling, you have total control to make the application uniquely your own. Over 2,100 application teams have trusted the Logi platform to help power their businesses with sophisticated analytics capabilities. Logi Analytics is headquartered in McLean, Virginia, with offices in Ireland, England, Ukraine, and China. Learn more about what's possible with Logi at logianalytics.com. So thanks again, Logi Analytics. All right, let's get some technical things out of the way. Please feel free to ask questions during today's session. You can do this by submitting them into the question panel on the right side of your screen. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. My lovely colleague Emily will be fielding your questions today. She's going to be happy to answer any questions you have, so why don't you pull up that question panel and say hi. Let her know you're listening. If you have any audio issues during today's presentation that will prevent you from listening, you may want to choose to dial in by phone. You can do this by selecting the More button in the upper right portion of your screen and then selecting the Switch to Phone option. All right, so today I'm talking to Brett Truca, who co-founded Devotry in 2015, a software services company in Denver. Brett started his professional career in Chicago when he joined a very tiny startup called Groupon. You might have heard of that. As you can guess, Brett learned there how to build and scale a sales team, which contributed to its massive growth and an initial public offering. After that, he made his way to Denver, where he helped build the sales team at Top Hat and Concept 3D in their early growth stages. Devotry was built on his realization that many companies struggle to build great software, and founding it allowed him to create custom software for companies like OrthoFi, NREL, and Arizona State University. So honestly, who better to kick off this series than you, Brett? Please do take it away.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And thanks to all of our attendees for joining us today. We appreciate you carving out some time to have this discussion with us. So to kick things off, everyone is here today because of product roadmaps. Product roadmaps, as you know, outline your product strategy, which keep your team accountable and help your stakeholders buy in. So today, we're going to talk about what to include in your product roadmap and product roadmap presentation to ultimately get your executive leadership team excited about your vision, which is what we all want. Now, this is no small task, as I'm sure you all know, and while successfully selling your roadmap is a bit more art than science, there are definitely some tried and true ways that can help you think through your pitch and ultimately get organized. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before we jump in, here's a quick rundown of the things that we're going to cover in this presentation. So first, we're going to work on defining the ROI of your product roadmap and why this is an integral part of selling your product roadmap to your executive team. Secondly, we're going to talk about the 5 most common paths to ROI. And finally, we're going to walk through the journey to ROI. So a lot of this has to do with how to reduce risk and format a timeline so that you can prove out your roadmap and ROI to your executive team. And as Shelley said, I want to make this an interactive presentation, so please feel free to ask your questions as we go along, and we'll get to them towards the end of the presentation. So, as a disclaimer, before we jump in, I'm a huge believer in keeping things as simple as possible. I think too often we're all guilty of overcomplicating things, and the game of business isn't easy, but identifying things that your executive team cares about is not that hard, and honestly, when you look from one business to the next, it's really not that different from a metrics perspective. Before we start putting our story together, let's start by getting in the minds of our executive team. At a very high level, what are the things that they care about most? Being a CEO, I can tell you what I care about most is ROI. And not just ROI from an immediate monetary perspective, although that's very important, but there's many forms of it. For example, revenue, which would be the immediate monetary perspective, profitability, reducing costs is another one, and improving operational efficiencies. These are the things that I care about most. ROI is the punchline that you're going to place into focus for your executive team in regards to what your product roadmap is going to positively impact. Do not bury the lead. That's one of my biggest pieces of advice. So when you're meeting with your executive team, once you've identified your ROI, lead the conversation with it. For example, something like, "Good morning, team. Thanks for allowing me time today to explain how my new product roadmap is going to improve our company's operational efficiencies, ultimately allowing us to enjoy higher profits." Now that you've said something like this, you've immediately got everyone's attention in the room, and they'll stop scrolling Instagram or whatever social media they love to truly hear you out. Now, to get to this ROI-centric punchline, we need to look under our iceberg and do our homework. Now that we're on the same page about what your executive team cares about the most, let's dive a little deeper into the 5 most common paths of ROI. So the goal in this exercise, as you're doing your homework, is to figure out how, at some point further downstream, your roadmap is going to fall into one of these paths. So let's quickly discuss each of these. Our first is increasing revenue. So is your roadmap going to provide areas that might attract new customers or create upselling opportunities to existing customers? Or perhaps your roadmap might open up the opportunity to develop new partner channels or deliver on opportunities for differentiation so that your sales team can be more successful in selling against competition. Our second most common path to ROI is about increasing profitability or reducing costs. Maybe your roadmap is going to replace a third-party source of functionality, ultimately reducing costs, or will it reduce another key metric that your team likely cares about, which is CAC, or cost of acquiring new customers, that is. And if you're a SaaS product company, I guarantee that this is something that you yourself or definitely your executive team talks about on a daily basis, which is how can we reduce our overall CAC. Our third path to ROI is about opening up new markets. Is your roadmap going to add functionality which will open up new market opportunities? By expanding your product roadmap or your product features, you can also expand and diversify your user base. Next, how will your product roadmap keep your current customers frequently coming back? And even better, how might your roadmap make it harder for a customer to switch to a competitor? Clearly not in any sort of unethical way, but I think we all, when we look at our company from a product perspective, we all want our customers to become more dependent on the value that our product provides. And last but not least is all about improving operational efficiencies. So is your roadmap going to dramatically reduce the time for customer implementation, or perhaps cut back on unnecessary work needed from your operations team? Now, these areas of ROI are commonplace with nearly every business, which reinforces the keep it simple nature of what we're suggesting today. So as you're working through this exercise in an effort to create your business case for your product roadmap, if you discover that none of these pathways resonate with your product plans, then you might be in danger of pitching the cool but not impactful feature category, which I think we all want to avoid. Of course, there are more paths than these, but we're starting here today and start asking yourself these questions, right? If we execute on this theoretical roadmap, will we impact 1 through 5 or hopefully multiple of them? So let's put these ideas into action. Let's consider a consumer app that we're creating a roadmap for called My Mileage app. Now, full disclosure, we made this app concept up over the last couple of weeks to use as an example, and we spent time on the name of the app, and as you can see, we got 50% creative with it. Maybe we could do better. There's room. Open to suggestions. Leave them in the comments, please. So at a high level, this app tracks mileage as you cycle. Right now, it's pretty basic, but we want to improve it incrementally. And as a product manager, I think I know the best ways to improve it. So I add those initiatives to my product roadmap. These are the 5 most immediate improvements I've identified for my mileage app. Number 1, I want to roll out advertising capabilities. Secondly, I want to replace Google Maps with an open source map tool. Third, I'm going to add a new running tracking option. 4, I'm going to enable push notifications. And 5, I have plans to implement an automated testing suite to fix quality issues. So as I flesh these out, I'm going to make sure that they align with a specific ROI measures so that I can ultimately position these positively to my executive team. So this first example is pretty obvious. Our hypothesis is by implementing advertising capabilities, our revenue will increase because our users will click on relevant ads. This certainly fits into one of our 5 paths to ROI, which is increased revenue. So it's a reasonable product update. Now, some things that your leadership team may ask you, and things ultimately that you should be prepared to answer might be things like, what kind of revenue can we expect in the first month after implementing this, or in 6 months after, or 2 years after? I think the point is incrementally thinking through from a go-to-market perspective with this product update, when can you actually enjoy the revenues of it? Secondly, how long will it take to implement these ads? And finally, a question that you should be prepared for in a scenario like this is, what are some of the drawbacks of adding this? Will our users drop off? Ultimately, you want to ask yourself, and really it's a recurring theme across all of them, what are the unintended consequences of this, the potential unintended consequences of this roadmap item? So next, in order to increase profitability, which is another one of our paths to ROI, we want to reduce some of our costs. We were previously with this product using Google Maps, and the Google Maps API was charging us far too much money. So by rebuilding the map component with OpenStreetMaps, which is an open source map software platform, we will be able to reduce our cost by 20%. Our third example of our roadmap is adding running to our cycling app. The theory is, if we add running functionality, we should be able to capture additional audiences, which grows our user base. This opens up our app to new markets, which should then increase revenue. Opening up your product to a new audience is no easy task either, and so be prepared to ask these questions from your executive team, or answer these questions rather. So one is there a current market for runners? I think we all know the answer to this specific one is yes, but in general, asking yourself that question with your audience. Secondly, where is the current running market? Meaning, what products are they currently using? Why will they want to come over to our app? And finally, is there risk for our cycle users switching to running, and then the cycling becomes obsolete? So we want to be careful in any functionality we do, and again, this is under the unintended consequences bucket. I want to make sure we don't cut off our nose to spite our face. Our hypothesis is with push notifications for things like if you haven't logged in a while, it will encourage our users to come back more often. And if they come back more often, they'll be more engaged and get more value from our app and so on. So push notifications certainly fits into one of our 4 paths of ROI, which is increasing engagement. And things to consider with new push notifications might be what kind of events trigger these notifications, and what are the potential drawbacks of getting too many push notifications. So we add these, and obviously a really good path with things of this nature is to A/B test to find out what some of this is, and really get a look under the hood at what some of the implications are of adding these push notifications. And as a product management team, one of the things we've experienced is quality issues when rolling out new features. We've worked with our engineering team on this issue, and together we feel that implementing an automated test suite will smooth out new feature rollouts and help ensure that we don't break things every time we debut new functionality. So the big question to answer for these types of operation efficiencies is, what is the cost of not doing this? So having thought through that is very important. Okay, so now that we've got some concrete examples of what our product roadmap might include, The next part of selling our roadmap is all about execution. So how are you going to incrementally add value while minimizing risk? After all, one of our product initiatives could easily backfire, right? So you don't want to spend your entire budget adding advertising capabilities only to find out that your users hate it and they may leave your app for another. So depending on the amount of investment required to get to the ideal state of your ROI that you're pitching to your executive team, there may be a need to incrementally prove out your hypothesis on ROI. One of the most common ways to do this, as you probably know, is an MVP. I'm confident that everybody on this call uses that term on a daily or weekly basis, but really we're talking about more than just an MVP. So what piece along the value chain, along your product roadmap, can be developed with the least amount of effort and cost while providing the most amount of value to your end customer? Identifying which pieces are key milestones will solidify your path to ROI and allow you to ultimately test your hypothesis and allow your executive team to sign off on smaller bites to find out. That will single-handedly contribute to your executive team signing off on your roadmap. Okay, so let's move into some real-world examples of how prominent, well-known companies have put some of the practices we've discussed into action. Path number one was, again, increased revenue, and LinkedIn is a great example of planning product updates to strategically increase revenue, which is the first of our 5 pathways to ROI that we've discussed. One example of a LinkedIn product update is targeted advertising. Targeted advertising launched in 2015 and allowed businesses to sponsor content to targeted audience. Let's consider how LinkedIn's product team positioned this roadmap in a way that would allow them to take small bets to test if their theory would work. So perhaps the initial version of their targeted advertising feature was only applicable to job title and not the fully robust targeting they have today, which I'm sure you're all aware of, which is company size, industry, location, and other criteria. Or perhaps they released this feature to only companies spending $50,000 or more to see if a company likes this new feature. Because content promoters could sponsor content based on job titles and industries, among other things, they could get more qualified traffic to their websites. This valuable traffic resulted in an increased use of this feature, growing LinkedIn's total ad revenue to over $580 million US. Our second most common pathway to ROI was increasing profitability. Netflix is a great example of this, and in 2007, Netflix reduced its business costs, therefore increasing profitability. And this was the year they started switching over from mail-order DVDs to streaming. In the mid-2000s, postage rates were going up, and the cost of high-speed internet was going down. And at some point, those expense lines crossed, and it became more cost-efficient to stream a movie rather than to mail a DVD. So Netflix strategically rolled out this product change so that they wouldn't disrupt their customer base. So they did 2 essential things. First, their Watch Now button started out small, or their Watch Now functionality rather, started out small with around only 1,000 titles, which is about 1% of their physical library. Secondly, they didn't squash their mail order business. And in fact, and I'm fascinated by this, you can still order a DVD from Netflix today and they will mail it to you. Imagine that. Because they slowly rolled out this change, they were able to gather data about how their streaming customers were using the new platform while simultaneously maintaining their core DVD customers. So by shifting to this business model, Netflix could provide more titles at a reduced expense, which increased profits. In 2018, Instagram tried to purchase Snapchat, and when Snapchat passed on the offer, Instagram rolled out a new copycat feature, which is Instagram Stories. Stories were the perfect way for Instagram to improve user engagement. Instagram's traditional feed was beginning to intimidate users. Users ultimately felt that their everyday activities weren't glamorous enough to post. So by introducing Stories, which basically lowered the bar of what was Instagram worthy, Instagram allowed its users to post and consume more content. Today, Instagram Stories engage over 400 million daily users, which is about double Snapchat. Now, the MVP of Instagram Stories is a bit unique because Snapchat already proved most of the business case for Stories. However, Instagram was able to use the knowledge of their customer base to improve on Snapchat's features. And as far as opening up new markets, Amazon is probably the best example. I'm not sure if you all have heard of Amazon. They're a pretty popular company. They started with just books, allowing tech-savvy readers across the United States to order online. Then they steadily opened up new markets, starting with music, DVDs, moving into toys, and then video games. And today, they now reach pretty much every U.S. citizen, among with millions of users around the world. That top screenshot that you see is Amazon's homepage from back in 1999. You can see the massive change in markets if you compare it to Amazon's homepage today. Opening up new markets turned out to be extremely successful, as we all know, for Amazon's top line. And Amazon Web Services is currently their most profitable service line, which accounts for $7.7 billion in revenue. This massive stream of revenue wouldn't have been possible if Amazon wouldn't have continuously pushed to enter new markets. And lastly, PayPal is just a good example of how a roadmap can improve operations. PayPal is widely known in the tech community for constantly embracing new technologies. One noted result for them, and we got this from their internal blog, that by introducing new technologies, batches and micro batches do their jobs in 1/10 of the time it took before. And with wider adoption, this kind of technology will reduce and allow for better organizational growth without growing the compute infrastructure accordingly. So, to wrap things up, if you all take anything away from this webinar, I hope it's this. With regards to selling your roadmap to your executive team, keep it simple, get to the point, lead in with which of your company's strategic metrics your roadmap is going to positively impact and how. Further, how can you help your executive team understand how they can make small bets from an investment perspective to shorten the path that is both timeline and cost, and validating the ROI behind your product roadmap? As you can imagine, at Debitree, we're constantly working with our customers to help ensure that they're solving the right problem, both for their customers and their company, as it relates to their product roadmap development. And I'd like to personally invite everyone on this call to reach out, utilize us as a resource, whether it's simply just to bounce your idea off of us, or to formalize your ROI of your product roadmap. So again, I want to thank you all so much. I know everyone's busy. Thanks for carving out time to talk about this important topic with us today. And we're going to move into any further questions that you all have at this point. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett. That was really quite impressive to see all of this condensed to 5 paths to ROI. And that makes it very easy for people to take that to their executive leadership. Before we dive into questions and giving everyone a chance to put their questions in right now, just remember that there are going to be 5 more sessions about leveling up your roadmap that you won't want to miss. Be sure to check out the next episode in the series. We sent out a link earlier. Emily's going to send out the link again right now. And okay, we've got our first questions coming in. Fantastic. So let me read this. So one of the things that you said here on your last slide, Brett, was that we need to sell the roadmap and get to the punchline quickly. I've got someone writing in just asking for a bit of clarification. So when you are talking to your executive leadership about this, you should lead with, this is the path to ROI that I have designed a roadmap for, something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the essence behind our suggestion about leading in with the ROI is really about this idea of, you want to set the stage, right? And understanding, in the beginning we talked about what is it that's important to your executive team, right? And there's going to be variations of that. We took the best stab at what we think that is most commonly from one company to another. But you all are going to have a better understanding of what it is as an organization you care about from a KPI perspective or a metrics perspective, right? So really what the point is identifying which one of those your product roadmap resonates with. Hopefully it does. And then leading in with that immediately, right? You can say, I know that one of our key performance indicators as a business is X. And therefore, we've designed a product roadmap that's going to impact X in this way, percentage, number, etc. So the idea really is that you're setting the stage for your executive team. You're going to have their attention from the get-go if you're hitting on something that you know that they care about. So hopefully that provides some clarity from a kind of leading in perspective. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Hopefully that person will write in and confirm in just a second. But in the meantime, we have another question from Bryant, just asking how long should a roadmap be designed for? Getting ROI on one feature is easy, but a product has dozens. So where do you draw the line?
Great question. I think in many ways, we can all agree. We've oversimplified some examples here to maybe exaggerate the point, but the reality is, Brian's point, a roadmap can be robust with, and probably is robust with many, many features that hit on different pieces of ROI. So I don't know that I can really answer the question on where to draw the line in a product roadmap for your organization, but rather consider looking at your roadmap and chunking it up. In one of these sections, we talked about identifying key milestones in the roadmap that would allow a truncated timeline, both in time and also in cost, that will be a little bit more digestible to your executive team. So in other words, if your roadmap, let's say you've been designing it for 6 months, which is very possible, if not longer, right? And you're getting feedback from your customers, et cetera, especially that can add to the timeline. Which pieces can you bite off and say, hey, the end goal in ROI is X. When we reach the end of this roadmap and we launch to all our users, we think the market opportunity looks like X. However, we don't have to spend our entire budget that we're proposing to find that out. We can release a version of this feature, release it to X amount of customers, and that will prove out another piece of our hypothesis. So the main point there is, again, thinking through how can you chunk things up to allow your executive team to make a smaller investment to further reinforce your theory.
Awesome. Bryant says that's a great point. Thank you. All right.
Great.
So more questions coming in. We have James, who says that he appreciates the simple approach, but wants to know, is this approach applicable to pitching to board and or investors when looking for funding, or would you generally recommend a more detailed approach for that?
Great question. So, my personal opinion is, look, if you have a relationship with your investors and your board, and they've focused on some different KPIs, then obviously you want to follow that path, right? And I think that's probably the obvious thing. I can say, again, when you think about investors, what do they want more than anything? They want a return on their investment. So, and the board members do as well. And the things that they want to see, they're going to want to see growth. They're going to see higher revenue. They're going to want to see profitability, new users, new markets. So I really feel at least probably all of these do resonate with them as well. And so I'm in the interest of keeping it simple, I think it's the same things. I think your executive team is going to care about what they have collectively decided alongside your board members and investors are the important strategic KPIs for the company. So I believe it's going to be the same things.
Great. Okay. Moving slightly away from the very simple approach to one of our listeners who has a roadmap with a mix of different ROIs, which does create complexity. Their roadmap has both increase revenue and improve operations as the ROIs. How should they handle that? Should they have two different roadmaps for one ROI each? What would you recommend?
I don't think so. I think unless they, the devil's in the details, of course, right? Unless that makes sense from a product roadmap perspective and design perspective. But I think that it makes a lot of sense that you can, it's the fact that you can increase revenue while also improving operational efficiencies is fantastic. And I think if anything, you're going to have a much better case selling your executive team. So So as far as how you're going to position those two, I think that it can be the same roadmap. I think that you want to be really clear about the timeline and the investment required with each of those different ROI paths on when you feel you're going to be able to enjoy them as an organization. So you want to be clear on timeline, even though they're kind of two different things. Be clear on timeline that you can all expect, right? Setting those expectations with your executive team. So I don't think they need to be two different roadmaps unless that makes sense for your product design team.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Next question comes from Will. He is wondering if you work with more traditional hard goods companies, and if so, what are some strategies you have used to make a company more agile and able to take smaller bets with hard goods? Interesting.
It's a very interesting question, Will. To be candid, we do not work with many hard goods companies. We do, not to get overly technical, our company, we work with hardware from an embedded hardware technology perspective, and we develop IoT solutions. But I don't believe that's what you're referring to at all. And, you know, I think many of the agile theories and kind of traditional business plan and business cases still hold true, I would imagine. Right? At the end of the day, the principles of if we do X in our hard goods roadmap, we're going to increase ROI by Y, and it's going to be this pathway. I think the same things hold true with respect to carving out a piece that can be developed with smaller investment. I'm just going to be honest that I that's not a space that I'm super privy to. But I do know, having met at different conferences with a variety of different technologies and older, I guess more traditional business models that aren't so web-based, technically focused. Many of them, as you know, are applying the new principles of agile development and roadmap design. So, sorry, I can't comment more on that one, Will. Great question.
Brilliant. Thanks for giving it your best shot there, Brett. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is our last question at the moment. So if any of you have been kind of waiting to get your questions in to see if there was time. Oh, yeah, people are already starting to write in again. Fantastic. But Brett, someone did ask, we have on these slides a lot of examples of UIs that have been radically improved over the few years, like Netflix, Amazon. UI improvement is not always something that you can convince your leadership is important. So which path of ROI would you consider the user interface being improved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a good point. I do think, you know, an updated user interface in a lot of these examples has really a lot of additional functionality in the back end and new product developments. But I think it is a fair and valid point that ultimately many of these are leveraging a new user interface, right? And so with regards to UIs, you know, that there's a lot of opinions out there, as you all know, right? The opinion of, hey, we think this is better, we think that looks better, or we think this is more modern. I think that as much as possible, you want to try to take opinions out of the matter, right? And so when you're presenting your case, there's plenty of case studies out there that say, by implementing, by moving the button here, having a call to action there, or overhauling the user interface to be more modern, that you can actually open up what in sales and marketing we refer to as the top of the funnel. And if you can open up and make your product more accessible and open up the top of the funnel, then that is a straightforward argument to say that we're gonna see an ROI on that. We're gonna see more conversions. We're gonna see more revenue. So I would argue that a change in user interface, if done the right way, can create an enormous argument in a positive way for ROI. I think that there certainly are some examples where, hey, we think this color's better, or we think, I'm exaggerating my point to make it, right? But where those can fall into the, as we referred to before, the cool but not really ROI impactful, right? Which is where we want to avoid. So it's a fair question to ask yourself. I think it's a good exercise, and I think, again, maybe perhaps this is the obvious, but you want to have done your research and show up as to why. This doesn't just look good. This is truly going to open up the top of the funnel for our business and allow more conversions.
Excellent. That's some real practical advice there. All right. Next question is in from Heidi. She's wondering if you have any tips on executives that are more focused on new markets and leaving out the existing customer base.
Interesting. I want to repeat that question and make sure I understand it. For executives that are perhaps less interested in how to expand on their existing company customers and venture into new markets, right?
Right, they're kind of leaving the existing customer base behind, I guess, assuming that it's fine, it doesn't need any help, and just looking to focus on the new markets.
Yeah, unless you're trying to make to use an overused term, an enormous pivot as a company, I can't imagine why you would want to. When we talk about top of the funnel again, and I've got a sales background, so it's sales and marketing, so it's a big term we use a lot. But there's no better top of the funnel than expanding upon your current customer base, right? How can we grow that base to increase revenue by either providing more value, providing additional features, etc. So if I understand the question correctly, and you're trying to make an argument that we should not leave behind our existing customers, I think that you want to make the case in how I just said, right? Which is, we can expand in these new markets, and we should, but we shouldn't, as I used before, cut up our nose to spite our face when we have so much upside with our current customer base. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm trying to answer these questions without a whole lot of context, but if any more context can be given and that can be more helpful, then great.
Awesome. I'll wait just a beat to see if Heidi does want to provide any more context. I will say I'm disappointed that no one's come up with any new names for your app, Brett.
Me too. I mean, it's on a scale of 1 to 10 creativity-wise, we're maybe at a 2.5, 3 on that name, so could use some help.
Maybe my mileage is just a total winner. It sounds like something that I'm sure I've seen in the App Store anyway. So
probably.
That familiar feeling to it.
Probably.
All right, well, it does look like that's all the questions we have today. I hope everyone listening had half as much fun as I did. I want to make sure we thank our sponsor, LogiAnalytics, once again, and Brett Truca, of course, I want to thank you. It's been absolutely amazing to have you on the show today.
No, thank you, Shelley, and thanks to everyone. Good luck to all of you. These are hard problems to solve, and so again, if we can be of any help or be a sounding board, let us know, and have a great day. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. As Brett said, have a great day.